politics of fear and hate are wrong. We love you and politics of compassion and love are right.
We are not going back. Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to episode unsure. Might be 25, might be 26, but check the title for that, of Raised Red Living Blue. I'm Sloane Roden. Jason Will is busy doing day job real estating today, so I'm taking the helm and invited friend of the pod, Justin Jones, to come back with us.
Thanks for having me back.
When I texted you yesterday, we'd already kind of been talking this week about some things, and it just felt like the perfect opportunity to have you come back. I read your latest Substack this week, which I loved, and then you and I did some like religious unpacking and how it deals with politics yesterday. And then, you know, this morning when you walked in, I've been talking about like, how do we find our tribe in this like red state as these little blue dots. And it just feels like all these conversations we've been having this week were so important. And so thank you for coming. And so we can like put these hard conversations out for the masses.
Let's tease it out.
Okay, so just a little kind of like personal mental health check-in. This is the week after Memorial Day. Kids are out of school. How are you and your family? Did y'all do anything fun this weekend? Have anything planned for the summer?
No, it's good. We are, into it. Got some baseball that we're wrapping up with our middle child. We try to keep them completely just busy. We're actually, I've never been to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania before, so we are taking my wife's extended families from there. So we're going to go up, flying to Pittsburgh, watch the Pirates. I'm a diehard Cardinals fan, so watch the Pirates Cardinals play, do Pittsburgh for 3 or 4 days. We're going to drive across Pennsylvania. We're going to stop at Hershey and do that, and then we're going to fly to Philly. Okay. So we may go see the Liberty Bell and do all that kind of stuff. And so it'll be a different kind of vacation. And me and the missus are going to go sneak away to Kiowa Island in South Carolina. So we've got a few things planned.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Gosh, Pennsylvania, you can do some like fun things, some educational. I know growing up, my mom always tried to like sprinkle in some learning, but I was like also a like voracious reader.
Oh, were you? Okay.
And kind of loved it. Like we would go, speaking of Kiowa, we for several years would take a week and go to Bald Head Island off the coast of North Carolina.
Okay. Which
at the time didn't have a grocery store and you couldn't have cars on there. So like it was fun. But we'd always take a day and go to the old Baldy Lighthouse, and walk up it and read about it. So I think like fun and education is like important to sprinkle through there. And my goodness, Philly is a place I've never been, but I would love to go, especially I feel like in these times where learning about history and where we came from and how we got here is so important.
Yeah. My oldest is he's 13. And so he's, we talk about stuff and I think he'll appreciate it, even if our 6-year-old is, not going to appreciate it. Well, we'll make it fun. We'll have a good time.
Yeah. Okay. When we walked in, we were talking about how to like find your tribe. When we talked yesterday, you really were like wanting to like unpack some things.
Yeah. What I was encouraged about just a moment ago as we were talking was just the conversations that you were having and how the lead up to that's happened. Really, you have found that tribe. I'm talking about even back in 2020.
Yes. And a little bit before that, yeah.
Sure. I'd love to, you want to tease that out for a second?
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah, for sure. Sometime in college, I like flipped from Republican to Democrat, voted for John McCain in 2008, but then for Obama in 2012. So sometime in that, I remember my senior year, shout out to my roommate, Mallory Meissner, if you watch this. I remember coming home and she had CNN on and I was like, well, that's interesting. That's different. Just kind of like living with somebody who has something other than Fox News on. Not that we like talk politics or anything. And then my 5th year, I lived with my older cousin, and he is a political science professor at UT Martin. But his mom, my aunt that I mentioned to you on the phone yesterday, for a long time, like we're like the black sheep, the Democrats of the family.
Right.
And then, I have like since like swung over there to them as well. And so just like living with people that have different things on TV and talking about different things, and then moving out, getting my first apartment. One morning, I discovered MSNBC, saw Joe Scarborough. There was the Alabama connection.
Sure.
And that really was kind of where I started. And so then it's like, I didn't really talk about it until other than like the people you absolutely knew. I think the special election in 2017 around here where Doug Jones ran against Roy Moore, So apparently to get a Democrat elected, it has to be won a special election where polls say that Democrats show out more than Republicans. You have to essentially run against like a pedophile.
I went to school here in Alabama, so I knew who Roy Moore was.
Yeah.
I was living in Tennessee, but I was still watching.
Yeah.
I was paying attention to y'all even while I was up there.
So that kind of like got a lot of people engaged, I think, in the Democratic Party locally because there was a little bit of hope. He was also from Mountain Brook. So then that was like a big pull of people from Birmingham behind him. Then I think you had the culmination of 2020 with COVID, so you could kind of see, unfortunately, how each person handled COVID. You could tell like where their political leanings were. So like with COVID, with the Black Lives Matter, with civil unrest, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of that, who was speaking out, what they were speaking out against, and then really the, J6 insurrection. Really, people got vocal, and you could tell who was on the left, who was swinging to the left. And then really in the last few years for me, most of the people I follow that are friends of mine are women. A lot of women that I went to Alabama with, were in sororities with, they became very, very vocal about IVF access, abortion access, because that goes into how we as women can plan for our families. And I don't know if it's more prevalent with women my age or if we as women are destigmatizing it and talking about it more. So you got to think those are like big things that are driving women my age and the ones that I'm around. And then think about, they're not just voting and thinking about themselves. It's okay, but I also have to think about my children and gun control and school shootings and now even vaccinations. So it's taken 6-7 years to kind of develop those relationships and who's who.
It's interesting for me. So I came to Birmingham in 2004.
Okay.
Was here for 5 years. Like, just absolutely loved it here. This was kind of like a big city for me.
Okay.
Came from Tennessee, small town, and college wasn't a big town either. So this is big city living. And kind of came of age here.
Was that when you went to seminary?
When I went to seminary here, yeah. And got married here. Met my wife here, got married here. So we really, really loved Birmingham. Left, though. So, and always kind of like, should we have left? Like, we kind of really like it. So then moved, was in Mississippi for 7 years, went to Memphis. I was there for 6 years, and then came back here in 2020. Literally bought our house in the middle of COVID where everybody's in like a hazmat suits. Not really, but I mean, we were not going in the office. We were all masked, signing our papers to get our house. Yeah. So anyway, it was interesting coming back here because I had a decent network of people. I knew, for not having lived here for 13, 14 years, I knew a lot of people here, most of which, kind of pastors and churches. But coming back was interesting. So it's kind of a known commodity while at the same time, I'm now bringing 3 kids with me. Yeah. And everybody's different, but it's the same. And so kind of like that. I like the familiarity of it, but we also had some figuring out to do. All that to say, whereas you've got this kind of deep social network, here, like for me, it's been interesting trying to kind of find like-minded people. So I love the fact that y'all are kind of processing this.
But you say, but you got to think, I was raised Church of Christ. None of us go to that church or a church or the Church of Christ anymore.
Sure.
And then especially like coming out, like I did a really poor job of not staying in touch with people. I had like a really like debilitating fear of people not accepting me.
So when did you come out? What year?
2013.
So not too far after college.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I graduated in spring of 2011.
Right.
Did not walk because of the Tuscaloosa tornadoes.
Okay. Yeah.
Then about 6 months after that, I broke up with my college boyfriend.
Okay.
That's so weird to say. Was single for about a year and then met Steph, and we've been together ever since.
Okay.
She's the only woman I've ever dated. So I was moving back from college. It was also, I got into real estate. Millennials didn't have jobs because there was no jobs to be had.
Right.
Everybody was moving in with their parents. I was also like dating a woman and processing that. So like I did a very, very poor job of like re-engaging with a network of people
Sure.
that I grew up with. It really was mostly staying in touch with like people that I knew from Alabama, but
Right.
a lot of people that like I was friends with either moved out of state, moved back home out of state, but like have re-engaged with some over the years. And that's really mostly been because of social media.
Sure. Sure. But it sounds like you're encouraged overall that there is a processing, even for people outside of the tribe, or people that you would have necessarily connected with since 17 up to the most recent election of folks who, you've at least got people who, they know you, they trust you, and they've seen that, how you have processed change, and I would think they probably think you're a pretty trustworthy person to talk to as they're processing. Is that safe to say?
I would think, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what you are kind of feeling now when you're like, I just need somebody to talk to, which is like so wonderful, and I'm like so happy, and will always, you know, I want to be that person. I feel like a lot of us, kind of my age, you know, we're just a few years ahead of you in that, but not like light years. But like I remember like another Democrat, and like my stepmom found this group of girlfriends, and they're all Democrats, and their joke, they call themselves the DLCs, the dirty little commies.
It's so funny. So funny. So, well, this sounds so...
Shout out dirty little commies. Thanks for listening.
This sounds so pathetic to say, but you know, when I was a pastor, I sort of fashioned myself as kind of the edgy. Like I didn't want to be pigeonholed into just your standard traditional Republican, you know, Christian guy. I mean, I always wanted to at least ask questions and feel like I wasn't fitting within that box. I enjoyed being hard to pick down a little bit, but
It's kind of like a teacher in school. Like you never want to like fully show your cards and sway, but like be there to open minds and hearts and think of things differently.
100%. Meanwhile, I care very passionately about these issues. So it's like biting my tongue the whole time, but doing it for some type of greater good or self-preservation or whatever. So, you know, with me kind of casting that aside in 2019, I missed the church in COVID. I watched it from an outsider and was just horrified at what I was seeing. So I'm just thinking, like, I don't think I would have navigated that well as a pastor trying to, because it was so, what you saw with Trump was, I'm going to avoid personal responsibility. It's the China virus, and it's all these other things. So like, because he's not capable of offering real leadership. And so because of that, COVID became this hugely politicized thing. Let's throw Fauci. Let's sort of, and of course, those who are really, you know, passionate about following Donald Trump saw it through that lens. And so the churches were like, we're meeting, damn it, and we're going to, you know, and it becomes very...
We're not sheep.
Yeah, exactly. But we're going to follow this guy who's going to... so I would not have handled that well, but I was glad to have avoided it. But all that to say, I've at that point, I kind of just wanted to shut up and kind of get rid of Christian stuff and not even think about it anymore. And then with the re-election, I've kind of gone, well, I've got passion on this subject. I'm kind of knowledgeable on this subject. And my real estate career is not, because I work primarily with investors who don't live here. I'm kind of have a freedom to speak. Because my client base doesn't live here and they really don't care. So that's probably given me a lot of latitude to speak freely, rightly or wrongly. But I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. What year did you decide to step away from, I don't know.
From ministry?
Yes.
2019.
2019. Okay.
Yeah, I moved. I had a great, wonderful church in Mississippi. Just sweet people. Those are the people I'm still closest to, stay in touch with.
Where in Mississippi?
Meridian, Mississippi. Yeah. But we had a situation where we started having kids. And my wife's family's from South Carolina. My family's from Northwest Tennessee. And it was kind of like, are we going to be here forever? We got to get close to one side of the family or the other. So not every single vacation moment is traveling, seeing family. We need some type of support system. And so moved to Memphis, and Memphis was just body blow after body blow after body. Just kind of got lot of stuff I wasn't full with, but we kind of just got thrown into it. So by the time 19 came along, got there in 14, by the time 19 hit, it was just like, we probably stayed longer than we should have. We were just kind of done with it because it wasn't me. And that, I think that's where bringing this full circle to kind of how do we process this with relationships and stuff. I felt very, especially towards the end, it was one thing to kind of bite my tongue into the teacher professorial, let's, be a sophist and let people think. By the end of it, it was like, I feel like I wasn't being really true to myself. Like I felt like I was having to play a game that was not who I was.
Right. Yeah.
And so by the time, so right now it's like me. I mean,
that game
I
gets
don't,
tiring.
Forgive me if this illustration is not appropriate, but it did feel like coming out
Yeah.
to a certain extent and kind of say, okay, I'm going to put this out here, and chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
But at least I feel like I'm being honest.
Right.
So I know in the grand scheme it's not that big of a deal, but it feels like a big deal for me.
No, I think it's all a very, very, very big deal. I don't know if, I can't speak for the whole alphabet mafia, but I do, like, I don't take offense to, you and Jason's kind of joked about it before. He's like, this is my coming out party. But like, cause you are like, you've like led your life and presented your life in a way like people who are in the closet, and then have to go against, especially here, a social and societal norm that could have backlash both socially and sometimes fiscally, economically for you and your family. I mean, so there's similarities in both. And so that what I'm saying, all that, it just kind of processing why I don't take offense to that. And it's almost like the best way to describe it, because you are shedding a mask that you've put on, for the outside.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you just can't wear the mask anymore. It gets so heavy.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think that's perfectly stated. I felt there's a lack of authenticity. And life, once you get to a certain point in your life, I mean, I'm in my mid 40s now. It's like, what am I doing here? What do I'm just going to be myself, and if you like it or you don't like it, whatever, I don't really care anymore. And I think there's a sense in which that can be, insufferable. People are just like, I'm going to be obnoxious, and
I think that's all within reason.
Right, but I would say
that's kind of that's like people like taking it to an extreme and a little too far. And there's a difference between like being authentically true to yourself, but also being an evolved human that can participate in society.
Right, because if you're trying to, let's say you start being like super combative or whatever, like really own this new identity, you're still a slave to other people, right? Yeah. You're either playing the game to make the people happy, or now you're playing the game, a different game, but it's still about other people rather than just being like what you want to be and who you are, and just being content with that. And so I'd like to think the latter is true. It's just in terms of how I'm processing, but yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll get on to the next thing. So if anybody's interested, go to Substack. It's called Dispatches from Alabama, which is like, I guess like the name of your
Substack, yeah.
There we go. But this article, Why Not a Theocracy? Rejecting the Unholy American Empire. I read it on Memorial Day, which was, I don't know if it was fitting or not, but I loved it. I'm just kind of like breaking down like a theocracy and people claiming that America was founded as a Christian nation, but like as a, the intent with which it was founded, I disagree with the claim of it being a Christian nation, and you talk about it so well here. Well, I was going to say, as I was reading this, I started doing other research, and then I sent you that article from, I want to say it was the New York Times, about the Russian Orthodox Church that is claiming to increase masculinity. So like men are
coming back
flocking to it, and it's just, I don't know, okay, well. Let's not go there.
Well, yeah, I think that stuff matters, though. I mean, because it really, what I try to talk about in the article is just how I mean, you want to call it a Christian nation. I want to tease out what that means, because the word Christian can mean anything. I mean, Donald Trump, Caroline Leavitt said, last week or so, like, yeah, Donald Trump's obviously a Christian. I'm like, okay, well, he doesn't know anything about the faith, doesn't go to church, he's publicly said, I don't need to be forgiven.
Right.
And kind of behaves like the opposite of Jesus in every way possible and doesn't really care. So, like, what do we mean by, even when you're talking about Christian nation, like, what do we even mean to be a Christian? And I think that's where, because Christianity has been so pervasive in our society for so long, in some form or fashion, rightly or wrongly, whether it's historical Orthodox Christianity or just like kind of, higher power, I mentioned Thomas Jefferson in the article.
Yeah.
Who like literally cut up a Bible, like, and I actually have it, the Jeffersonian Bible, where you can like see where he's like, this is the Bible that I will accept, and it's no supernatural, no incarnation, no resurrection, but it's just the teachings of Jesus. And for him, I mean, I think he ran for office at one point.
I think we'd call that severability.
Right. But I think he had to kind of play the Christian game, because am I going to be able to get elected and not be a quote unquote Christian? And so the term is just so amorphous. When someone says it, I want to drill down and kind of find out what are we really talking about here?
Yeah.
Back to the Orthodox. Yeah. So there's this kind of masculine, and you're seeing it. I mean, I think Jason even mentioned it when we were together before, just this kind of rise in this kind of masculine Christianity for people who think the world has become too feminized. But I asked the question, okay, are we talking about Jesus here? Or are we talking about some like Platonic male dominance, permission to be an asshole Christianity? Because I think if you read the words of Jesus, you're going to have a hard time squaring that with like this rugged, buff, version of Christianity that's really not like, I think it's about power and control.
Yes.
And so people are flocking to it because I think they see it as an avenue to structure society. And, in a world where there's cultural change and there's just ambiguities, that people can say, oh, here's Christianity. It's been around for a long time. Let's go with that. But I want to ask the question, wait, what's our agenda here? What is your understanding of Christianity? And are we really even talking about the same thing?
Yeah. My gut reaction to that is like, I doubt we're all talking about the same thing, because there's already so many interpretations of the Bible.
Right.
And, if there's one thing I feel like for certain is like people are going to disagree upon interpretations, and that's what's called that's what's caused like divisions and splinterings like within denominations. So like we don't even have like all these hundreds of denominations. We even have factions within them. And that's part of, I think, my cynicism around people claiming like, well, we're a Christian nation, and it's like Christians themselves can't even agree on the same things, yet you're gonna say that we as a country are a Christian nation. It just...
I've led groups of Christians in leadership talking about things as simple as like what color the carpet should be and all this kind of stuff. And we can't agree on that.
Yeah.
Like the idea that we could have a whole country that was run by Christians when I've seen sort of the dysfunction that can happen even within small churches is like, scares the living hell out of me.
Right, and then it's like, well, what form is it going to be?
It's a quick aside in the article, but I make the case, were there Christians fleeing persecution who came to America? Sure, but they were fleeing persecution from other Christians.
Right, to be able to practice in the way they wanted.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, like if we're going to have, what are we going to have? Like the Church of America, like there was the Church of England. If it's, if it leans Episcopalian, by all means, like some Catholic light, loving the gays, open-minded, here for it. But if it is a, Church of Christ, Southern Baptist, like,
well, you can see
hard pass.
Well, you can see that Trump, I mean, he's got Paula White, who's this charismatic gal out of Texas who's just wild. So that's when Trump sort of attaches himself to Christianity, it's very much kind of the Pentecostal bent, or folks who really
almost like televangelicals.
yeah, televangelists. Yeah, yeah,
There we go. Yeah.
yeah, 100%, and that's
Because they're grifters too, and he's a grifter, and the grifter loves to grift.
perfectly stated. They are from the same stripe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's the notion that we could ever even get past. But at this point, it's kind of like phase one. Let's just let's all just own the libs together, and then once we own the libs, then we'll start fighting amongst ourselves. And figure out who's the real faith, and I think what scares me about right now in so many ways is just the lack of historicity. Like, people don't know history.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know the 30 Years' War in Europe.
Right.
When you just had like states attached to religion fighting each other, and it's pretty dang bloody. Like, and the beauty part of what we've established in America, I mean, you were able to get Enlightenment deists and Christians, Orthodox Christians, and then some people who had been influenced by the Enlightenment and claimed Jesus, but were they Orthodox? And figuring out what people really believe, that's a messy thing anyways. But you were able to find some type of common ground. We believe in some type of absolute something that grounds us in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. Like, the fact that our country has run for 250 years with living with a certain tension. Like, that we all are on the same page, but we can agree enough to create a society that's been, it's messy. Our history's funky. There's lots of things we can look at and go, ugh. But compared to so many systems throughout the world, like, there's been a lot of good here too.
Yeah.
So when we talk about like it being overtly Christian nation, I get real, like, I think the founders emphatically, even if they were Christian, did not want that. Like, they saw the impact. The Enlightenment created religious freedom, which meant we didn't have to fight wars over God.
Okay, we mentioned this on the phone yesterday, and you talked a little bit about it now, and this goes into like the history of religion that I'm not familiar with. So kind of like what happened within religion during the Enlightenment, and kind of like what came out of it.
Okay, so I'll actually give you 2,000 years of history and try to do it in like a minute. So the first 300 years of Christianity, it was kind of this organic grassroots movement. The church was kind of doing the thing, and you had the Roman Empire, and
kind of like what we think of like with the apostles, and maybe not the apostles, but
yeah, well, that's where it started, right?
Yes.
You had the apostles, and then you had the church that grew out of that, and it had a weird relationship with Roman leaders. Sometimes they really liked them, and sometimes they didn't.
Yeah.
But they understood themselves to be very kind of, they were operating within a functional government and just trying to spread the word of Jesus.
Right.
Okay, and then 313, Constantine came along, declared Christianity this is the religion, right? And so there's this sort of marriage of church and state.
Okay.
And I'm way oversimplifying this, but I think that pretty well continued up until 1517, Reformation. So,
gotcha. Okay.
And at that point, Martin Luther came in, and the church and the state, you've got Christianity telling throughout Protestantism, we're protesting the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is tied to the state.
Yep.
So at that point, you started having these Protestant factions.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's where everything began to, it wasn't just as clean as Christian, like church and state together. But what you had come out of this, I don't want to get too technical here. You had really three strands of approaches to kind of the question of church and state.
Okay.
You had the Anabaptist stream. Okay. You think Amish. There's a kind of a looking at the state. The state is always going to be doing bad things, and we need to separate ourselves from it. And we're going to have our own little pure community over here and do our thing. Okay, so that's the Anabaptist stream. Okay. Then you have what kind of Martin Luther and, ultimately John Calvin had, which was kind of what's called the two kingdoms. So you have the church and the state, just like the Anabaptists, but the state kind of serves its own purpose, and the church has its own purpose. And you'll see that in the article. I'm very much, that's part of how I think about things. I think for the better. But, you have the church, which is, we're going to preach grace, and we're going to preach forgiveness, and we're going to preach Jesus. And then you have the state, and their job is to, potentially lock up criminals.
Uphold the rule of law for the protection of its citizens.
Exactly. And
so you can have a society where people feel safe and they can live their life without fear and
Right.
yeah.
And so Romans 13 is a book of the Bible, the chapter where it talks about it does not bear the sword for nothing. Now, it's always interesting if a Republican's in office, you're going to hear a lot of Christians start quoting Romans 13. We got to obey the government as a God-ordained institution. We got to believe in it. Obama's in office, Romans 13, we don't talk about that as much. So it's just always interesting to hear the emphasis depending on who's in power. But that's a side note. But in the two kingdoms model, you have kind of the church doing its thing and the state doing its thing, and they both serve a larger purpose, but they're different. And I believe in that very much. And then you have like what's called, this guy named Abraham Kuyper, who's a Dutch theologian, and he has this famous quote like, "There's not one square inch of the world that God doesn't say mine," meaning like the church and the state are not one and the same, or not. There's less of a distinction between the two, right? Okay. And so you have Christians who are sort of Kuyperian, who want to make the world Christian. There's a liberal kind of stream of that where we're like, hey, we want to have economics where poor people can thrive, and like that's good. But there's also like what we're seeing with the MAGA crowd, which is more like we're going to turn in and we're going to go Old Testament on your ass, and that too. And so if you
but we're going to choose parts of the Old Testament that we like,
the parts that don't involve us forgiving debts and taking care of the vulnerable and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's very selective. But
and divorce and yeah,
exactly. So it's whatever serves our purposes.
Which I used that argument against my mother one time, and it was not good.
Oh, I could see that going really south and sideways fast. So that may be too technical, and I'm sorry if it is. But I think between
I liked it
in the article that you see. Because I don't like being pigeonholed, I'm going to take a little, because all of them have their flaws, right? The Anabaptists going and doing their thing off by themselves and hating the government is kind of like a convenient position.
Yep.
Where you don't really you're not really doing anything outside of just being off by yourself. That's a problem. The Two Kingdoms thing,
I'd kind of call that like isolationism.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. The church we love the Amish, they do their thing, but it's not like they're, to what extent are they contributing to society?
Right.
In a larger sense. And is that Christian calling to actually do that?
And that was an oversimplification for me. But saying like we want nothing to do with anybody outside of us and we're only going to protect our own and do that thing. It's like, oh, interesting.
Right. But
there's a word for that that's coming up a lot lately.
Right. But I think that's the Amish thing is not the temptation right now. The temptation right now is to go full Kuyperian and just say, we're going to go and reconstruct America and make it Christian because God's over everything and we want to make everything subservient to our God, which in theory that makes sense, but that's far more complicated than they're making it. And so I like the Two Kingdoms model in that it separates the church and the state. I don't have to attach the word Christian to everything in the world. I think I used the term the other day, like that Christian can be a great noun, but a terrible adjective.
Right.
When you start just labeling anything and everything Christian, back to the grift thing, it just becomes a grift.
Yeah.
But the problem with the Two Kingdoms model is, Luther, Germany, and what ultimately happened with the 1940s and Nazism, where you could have like a Christian who goes to church every Sunday and then they, kill Jews all week. This is where your faith gets sort of bifurcated into, I have my Christian thing and then I have the rest of society, and those two things don't overlap to the extent that they should. And so, is this helpful? Or
I love it.
Okay, so in my article, what I'm trying to do is to celebrate the fact that, I do think the church is a different kind of place, and Christians need to think about not trying to make society Christian, but to focus on the fact that they themselves and their churches need to be Christian. Like that's important. The Two Kingdoms thing, government is not evil or bad necessarily so, but it can do evil things, and it can be really complicated. And there's a certain degree to which, we need it, but it doesn't need to become, we don't need to label it as Christian. And then the Kuyperian thing is, yes, Christians have an opportunity to influence society, but they need to recognize that they live in a world with other people who don't agree with them. And so how do you do that effectively in a way where you're not trying to force Christianity onto people who don't believe it?
Right.
And so I'm trying to do all three of those things at once.
That goes to a lot of like what I'm hearing. I feel like especially like on the podcast Raging Moderates of saying like, and I think it goes into like what we have to do with real estate negotiations as well. Like you tend to get to the best outcome when there's a little give and take, and you can admit, okay, like this isn't fully right in and of itself, and so like how can we take some of this that works and some of this that works and some of that works. So like I see you doing that here, and then I see that same idea and kind of like premise used in other ways that I find like can be beneficial.
Right. And a lot of this, I mean, what's interesting for me is like I'm giving you sort of the education that I have. How I'm personally processing this is like a completely different matter. I'm sort of trying to speak about this just from a academic approach.
No, for sure. And I appreciate that. So we get to this point, and then do we get to like kind of like what happened in Enlightenment and
so Enlightenment,
all these words like from school that I'm like, oh gosh, maybe I should.
So what happened in the Reformation, all of a sudden religion got taken away from the Catholic sort of church and the church and state to these different factions or different states, I should say, that are tied to various religious expressions, Lutheranism or whatever. But gradually speaking, as Europe, they were going through war, they got tired of killing each other over God. And eventually what happened with guys like John Locke and just reason in general became sort of primary. Like we can arrive at absolute truth through us in our powdered wigs and our ruffles on our shirts. We are enlightened, and we through our philosophical meanderings understand what is absolutely true. Okay, and so much of Western society has been built on this Enlightenment piece. That we aristocrats, intellectuals, can arrive at what is true. The problem with the Enlightenment, though, is like it doesn't hold up. The notion that all men are created equal, we can agree on that. But most people throughout human history have not agreed on that. So just because the Enlightenment people sat around and said, this is true. Why? Because we said it and we're smarter than everybody else, doesn't make it true. Now, do I believe it's true? Yes, but the notion that I can just come up with what is absolutely true in my powdered wig, with my ruffles, and that's not how not everybody agrees on what is true. Okay. So you have Christianity with all these thoughts, Judeo-Christian thought, influencing the Enlightenment. These people are baptized in the state churches, and they've been, presented with Christian faith, but they're not necessarily believing it. They're believing other things. Some of them are becoming atheists. Some of them are becoming deists. The kind of Aristotle, the unmoved mover, right? The God who just kind of spins the top and lets it run. That's not Christianity, right? But they're still operating within Christian spaces. And so when you look at a document like the Declaration of Independence, you've got sort of this common ground between some people who are, when they hear creator, they think the God of Jesus, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deists looks at the word creator and they're going, this is the unmoved mover. This is the guy that started everything but doesn't really care about what's going on right now.
People aren't necessarily agreeing on who that higher being is. Maybe only in the fact that there is one.
Exactly. And this one thinks that all men are created equal, right?
That's a distinction that needs to be made.
Right. So now how the Enlightenment people came to this conclusion, they had been influenced by Christianity in ways that they didn't know. So when all of a sudden you have people who want to say we're a Christian nation, that's what they're getting at. And I don't think they're completely wrong necessarily in saying, yes, Christianity influenced how we got to those beliefs. But the guys who were saying that were not necessarily Christians by the metric of which you would let them come into your churches because they believed in the resurrection or Jesus or anything like that. So that's where it's super murky. So I want to be able to throw a bone to the people who say, hey, Christianity influenced the country. Fine. Yes. I don't disagree. And yet the guys who were writing the Declaration of Independence did so with tension to allow for us not to have a state religion. So we can stop killing each other over God.
Right.
And drowning heretics.
Right.
And so
right.
it's the document is
because that was like plagued Europe for centuries.
Absolutely.
So it's like, well, there was a problem over here. So if we're going to do something else,
right,
we should eliminate this problem.
So let's find a least common denominator, God. We can all agree that a God exists, and He's going to give us freedom to worship how we want to, and let's build a society based on that, and not on Jesus Christ, the resurrection, those things which are faith commitments that belong to, in my view, belong to the church, not to the state. So, is this good?
I'm here
Is this
for
chasing rabbit
it.
trails?
No, I like it. Yeah, I'm here for it. I don't get to talk about all this deep stuff with anybody, so I'm here for it.
So, the problem with the Enlightenment, like I said, men in powdered wigs doing their thing. When you start seeing the Romantics, the Romantic period, people writing poetry, and all of a sudden you're like, y'all are way too in your head. We need to start arriving at truth through our hearts and what we feel, because y'all have intellectualized the universe, and it's boring and stale, and like that's not how you arrive at truth. It's not just through reading books. It's by exploring nature, Walt Whitman style, and going to. So that's where Romanticism kind of came out of the Enlightenment, and then you have kind of postmodern thinking. And you get into Nietzsche, and everything's about truth is power. I'm talking about truth's written by the winners yesterday, that kind of thing, and so our perception.
History's written by the victors.
Right.
Yeah.
So the perception is that there really is no such thing as absolute truth. Truth is just, conditional. It's circumstantial. It's based on your context, kind of thing.
I can agree with that.
And there's a degree to which I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
I'm probably of kind of the postmodern Christian bent, where I go, okay, the beliefs that you have you've been shaped by your circumstances and your belief system and what's happened. The question is, does that necessitate there being no such thing as truth at all? Is everything just, it's fine for us to not kill people here, but it's fine for them over there to kill people because their truth is different than our truth. Make sense?
Yeah.
So, deep philosophical questions that are impacting not only how we founded the country, but how people are to think about it today. What I find,
but I also think goes to a false claim of how the country was founded.
False claim of how the country is founded. False claim about what the country has been.
Yeah.
They want to whitewash history to say up until the 1960s, when, ironically enough, black people got rights again, as they should have been guaranteed by the Declaration of Independence, Constitution. We have since then gone off some anti-Christian tangent that we need to reclaim. So we need to get back to where we used to be, and then I kind of go, where did we used to be?
Right.
We used to have slavery. We used to have, the slaughtering of Native Americans. We used to have Jim Crow. We used to have internment camps. We used to do all, McCarthyism. We did all sorts of shit prior to.
Women couldn't have a credit card in their own name without a cosigner of a man.
100%.
From the 1970s. And it was just, I would have to look it up, but no fault divorce has not been around for very long. And people say, well, my grandparents never got divorced and there's an attack on marriage. And it's like, yeah, because your grandmother didn't have any other options.
She probably hated your grandfather, but she kind of stuck with it because she had to.
Women couldn't leave abusive relationships because they didn't have a job. They couldn't have their own bank account. They didn't make their own money. And it's like, that's not, and it goes back to this, the repetition and the theme of zero-sum game that's everywhere. And it's like the rise of feminism does not equal an attack on masculinity.
Right.
It's like rights for one group of people does not take away rights from another.
It shouldn't.
Correct. And the ability for, the fight for women in the workplace and equal pay, and minorities in the workplace and equal pay for them as well, because, white men still make more money than everybody else, doesn't mean there is an attack on white men. But,
Right.
but I view that as their perception around it, which goes to male fragility. And I want to oversimplify it because that's the fun thing to do. And it's like, well, if you want that job, if you like want to get a wife or keep a wife, just fucking be better.
Right.
Like, be better. Okay, this is the headline. I'm not going to watch the whole thing. Christian nationalist pastor Joel Webbon says that if we are going to live in a society where everyone gets a vote, then he should get 20 votes because my voice is more important.
Yeah.
My voice is more important. Yep. So I'm fine with everybody having a vote, but I should get 20. I should get 20. Or what you could do is you could just say, no, we're actually just going to take votes from one sector of the population. And it's going to be heads of household. Yes, I'm speaking of men. And those individuals will have a vote. And it doesn't mean that nobody else has a voice, but everybody else will have a voice underneath their federal headship.
Do you think he believes it, or is more like a provocateur to gain a following? That's what I can't like figure out with these people. Like, do they believe it truly, or is it to gain recognition and a following? And
It's a great question. I don't.
And I mean, there's probably like a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of both, because I think they're obviously, and we see this with just media in general, right? It's clickbait. It's, can I attract an audience by, how are you going to do that? By being the most vocal or whatever. Here's the problem. Whether he believes it or not, his audience will. And it becomes...
Yeah, he's still, to use, for lack of a better word, he's still evangelizing something that is so very harmful.
Yes, and in doing so if this has been the interesting thing. I stepped away from the church ministry in 19. It's 15 now.
Okay.
And so I've had 6 years of just watching it. And so you're watching the Overton window move. So if this is what grabs people's attention being provocative in 19,
right,
then what does it in 21? And what does it in 23? And what does it in 2025? So you've got to keep amping up the level of rhetoric to keep people engaged. And whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. I mean, it's not irrelevant completely. I'm not trying to punch your question, but
yeah, well, whether he believes it or not,
the people are, and that's where
it goes back to it's still a grift.
Exactly. And so for me, as somebody who has taken this whole Jesus thing seriously, when I see people using Christianity to harm other people or to take advantage of other people, it pisses me off. And I would say this, the reason it pisses me off is because the four Gospels, and I'm not trying to say, oh, look at me, I'm like Jesus, but that's what pissed Jesus off. Like, when you see Jesus fired up, it's religious people taking advantage of the poor and taking advantage of people's need and sincerity.
Is that when he got mad in the temple and started overturning the tables and stuff?
Because they were taking advantage of people who had pilgrimaged all the way there, and they were doing like the money changers thing. They were charging interest on it, and they were taking advantage of the people who were coming there. That's what pissed Jesus off. But it's consistent. Like, that's why Jesus, he doesn't go around condemning the sinners. It's the religious people that he has the sparring partners. That's who he does consistently.
Yes.
It's over. It's not just one time. Like, it's the whole thing. And that our current generation of evangelicals cannot see themselves in that.
Right.
Because their whole thing was, we're going to be good. We're going to obey the law. The Pharisees, we're going to become law abiders so we can get the Romans out of here because God wants to make Israel great again. Like, that's what it was about.
Yeah. It's just funny how you...
Get the Romans out of here, we can have our law, or we can have our country back. And it's just the same thing happening now.
Do you think In your observation in the ministry, but also now just outside of it, talking with people, being in the church, do you observe people reading the Bible and doing like their own kind of exploration within it? Or do you more see people showing up on Sunday like a baby bird and just being fed?
There are people who...
I don't know.
No, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think while I was in ministry, I made this comment often. Like, you see me once a week, maybe twice a week if you come to an extra service.
Yeah.
You're watching Sean Hannity every night. Okay? So we can talk about what does discipleship look like. Like,
Yeah.
But you're listening to a 20-minute sermon, from me. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, what's really shaping you and forming you are these other things going on. And that's impacting you far more. Not just Sean Hannity, but I mean just your conservative spaces that you're operating in.
Well, and couldn't that be an example of like idolization?
100%. But it's, I think it's more subtle because what ends up happening is...
Yeah, it's real easy to it's not big gold like Baal. That's like real easy to like not bow down to a golden statue. Let's, take the Gaza AI generated video out of this.
Right.
Yeah, it's real easy when it is black and white, but not when it begins
to get blended in.
Yeah, it like permeates.
That's it.
Into your life and into culture. You'd almost have to like step back from it to realize like that's what's being done. But like you're being fed that, they don't want you to, whether it's Fox News or some churches and some religions, and like they don't want you to like step back and think for your own.
Right.
They want you to continuously have to come back, which is my grappling and my issue with the fact, like I don't believe that people are inherently evil, but I think that's a really good narrative for an organization to use, so that you have to come back every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then you got to go to Bible study during the week, and then your kids have to plug into a youth group, and then like you can't be good unless your whole life is infused within the church, and then don't have friends of other religions or other, let alone denominations. Because then you could be... Because
you are the definite article Church of Christ.
Right, yeah. Because then you could be exposed to something, and then if there is a controlled environment of what you receive and then what you believe, then you're always going to keep punching that ticket for more.
Sure.
I love talking about religion and Christianity with people who are or have been unpacking it, because that's almost harder to find than a Democrat in Alabama, to be honest. And a lot of people, if they've done one, they've done the other, or the other is not far behind.
Right.
They tend to kind of go hand in hand. In my experience with the people that I've...
Yeah, I think that's sort of a natural trajectory. Like once you chunk, like or once you sort of free yourself, I'll use it in a different language, in a positive sense. Like once you sort of free yourself of what's been holding you,
break free from the chains.
I think at that point, there's a natural trajectory to chunk it all, unless there's something that you can find life-giving in it. And I doubt very seriously, based on the conversations we've had, that you held on to much that you could kind of go, well, 90% of it was bullshit, but I at least took this nugget that was valuable. It doesn't sound like you even had that 10% that was left, or maybe you did.
I don't know.
And forgive me if I'm projecting.
No. I don't know. I've not thought about it in that stance. I believe the Bible was a book written by men in a time where history was not recorded, and so it was a lot of oral stories that were passed down. And I kind of mentioned this last time, like what, because these are the examples that my dad uses, but it's like, was Jonah literally swallowed by a whale?
Yeah.
You know, probably not.
But I think you grew up in an environment, if I can interrupt,
Yeah.
where like
You were literally taught.
If it's not literal,
Yeah.
then it's it's a lie, it's not true, the whole Bible falls in on itself, Christianity's a lie, and there we might as well just go and, start murdering each other in the streets.
Yes.
Like,
it was a.
And we're going to hell too, because
Yeah.
after we murder each other in the streets, we didn't believe that Jonah was literally swallowed by a whale, so we're not a believer and we're going to hell.
Yeah,
So.
and so that, there's probably, because I was raised in so far to one side of that spectrum of the literal, it is how it was written, it is in black and white, and there is no room for interpretation. It's probably why I'm so wary of so many of it.
But could I say this?
Yeah, please.
I don't think
This is me actively processing it, and it's messy,
Sure.
which is why I tend to do it in my head before I start speaking.
No, I think it's great. I think it's honest, and I like this stuff. I just I know there's a finite amount of time we can do this. With Jonah, for instance, I mean, you've got certain people. I think you used the language of Aesop's fables last time around.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of like
Which
a nice.
people tend to use like another word for that, and I can't.
Allegory or
Yes, allegory.
Okay, so I could view this in like a strictly historical. It had to have happened, and I have to believe that it happened, or otherwise I'm not believing correctly. And then you have certain people who are just like, the Bible's just full of made up stories, and if you whatever, it's cute, and kids and animals getting on the ark, and that's a fun little thing. I got a painting on my wall of that for my kid, so that's great too. I want to say, like, the Bible is full of genres, right? So you've got areas or parts of the Bible that are highly symbolic.
Yeah.
And whether or not they actually historically happened doesn't you miss the point. If the question of did Jonah literally or not literally, we've missed the whole 4 chapters, which is telling a story. Well, it's telling a story about Israel's racism, and it's about their self-righteousness, and it's about
What you're saying is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
There's some type of water joke to be made with Jonah and that. I can't. My brain's not working well enough to make it. But I think, the point of it is not. I think we as modern people, now we're back to the Enlightenment, want to get down to historicity. True, false, did it happen, did it not? And in doing so, we've lost the poetic. The Bible has a lot of poetry in it. There's a romantic.
What's the saying? You lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, because I would make the argument that the Bible, when I'll put it this way, what made sense of the Bible for me when I was searching was it as one whole coherent story. Okay, so you have creation in the garden. God made it good, so inherently evil. We got to nuance that from back before, because I think that's a yes, but, or we need to tease that out. What's meant by that? But the Bible, God made it good.
Yeah.
Whether that historically happened or not, that's that. Now we're having that conversation.
Right.
But in terms of what we see, because I don't know that I believe that. Here's the problem with Genesis 2 or even Genesis 1. Who was there to write it down? How do we know? No one was there to write it down. So how do we but it's there, and so is it poetry, is it allegory, is it whatever? But the Bible, I think, when it's operating well, is kind of like, okay, we got creation, we've got the world goes to shit, Noah, God says, Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, stars of the sky, sand of the sea. You're going to have, Father Abraham has many sons, and I'm one of them, and so are you. And
I'm having VBS flashbacks right now.
Yeah. And then you have the Old Testament, you have Israel, you have the land. Israel screws up, they do their thing. You have Jesus who comes in, he's the true Israel. He's the embodiment of everything they were supposed to be but weren't. He's the guy who spent 3 days in darkness, just like Jonah did in the fish, whale, whatever. That's on purpose. And then sets the church on its
some things.
trajectory, and then by the end of it, you see Revelation, where God's brought the whole story together. So that to me is like, oh wow, there's something. I'm not getting lost in, did Moses part the Red Sea?
Right.
I think the story sucks if he didn't, but whether it actually happened or not, that's missing the point.
Yeah, and that could, and I don't know if it was my interpretation. It could be a number of things. It could be like my interpretation.
I'm sounding like a real liberal right now, by the way. I'm going to get kicked out of church for this. But
Right. It could be, I left the church in my early 20s. So, like, I didn't learn about these stories from that adult perspective.
Right.
It was the teachings in Sunday school and the books you read at night to your children. And we had those little cassette tapes in the car that was that's how I learned to sing the Bible verses. I think they were yellow. You probably, it was like probably a mail order from somewhere, so there's probably a myriad of that, because then of course it's how you're raised and the context that it was used and the age you were when you were taught it. That probably goes to a lot of it, and I wasn't at the age where it was taught. Okay, you always learned this part that was just the end, but not this backstory behind it.
Mm-hmm. I think for the simple explanation, it's kind of like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. Like, be good for goodness sake. Why? Because Santa's going to bring you a present, or don't put if you don't do this, obey, reward, disobey, or whatever, you don't get the good stuff. And I think people preach the Bible or teach the Bible in a very moralistic way. So when people use the word like Christian nation, they're using the word Christian and moral synonymously. And I want to say that's not accurate. Okay, let's think about the story of the prodigal son. Is that one? Okay. You tell me right now the story of the prodigal son. And I'm sounding bossy right now, but I want to hear you say it.
It's been so long. Was it 2 sons or 3 sons?
2 sons.
Okay, so 2 sons. One stayed at home, was good, did everything. One went out, was not a part of the family. I don't remember what he did, but then
whores and whiskey. That's what he went out and squandered all his dad's wealth on cocaine and hookers.
Okay. So I was gonna have a negative connotation. I wasn't sure if that was true or insinuation. Yeah. So he went out and did not live the true and righteous way in which was expected. But when he returned, they rolled out the red carpet for him, and all was forgiven.
Perfect. All right. So the point of the story.
And I was like, "Fuck that guy."
So the point of the story.
Also, I was a rule follower.
Absolutely, you were. If you go back and look at it in context, Jesus is telling this story. So we hear that story and hear moralism.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't go out and spend your money on whores and whiskey, but if you do, God will welcome you back. That's a nice message.
Yeah.
It's a good message. It's not untrue. But Jesus...
But sometimes I feel like people use that message in order to do those things and be like, well, it's fine, I'll just be forgiven.
Fine, yeah.
And I have an issue with that perspective of Christianity.
Absolutely. Because, there's a version of that called worm theology, where I'm just a piece of shit, so pieces of shit do pieces of shit things, and God forgave me, I don't care. And I've lived in that sort of version of that in the church.
It seems like a cop-out to me.
Yeah, it's a way not to actually care. But let me go back to this, because this is the point I want to make. When Jesus tells that story, he is telling it to self-righteous Pharisees. The point of the story is not the guy who goes and spends money on whores and whiskey. That's great, but it's a moralistic version. The point of the story is you are like the big brother who stayed back and thinks he's better than them. You're like them. If you read the whole story, because he says he's reading this to, he's speaking to those who believe themselves to be righteous. So we hear it as a moralistic story about the bad son.
Yeah.
It's actually Jesus confronting the self-righteous brother who stayed back and thinks he's better than the other one. And so I guess the point I'm making...
What did I say? Self-righteousness is a lonely place?
Yeah.
Which clearly is the message I need.
Well, don't we all? But I guess the only point I'm making is that for so many people, they've heard the Bible preached moralistically.
Yeah.
They hear it as just like, do this, don't do this, go to hell, whatever. And
100%.
And that's not like, I'm not saying that good and bad, evil, obedience, all that stuff. Yes, it's there. But what Jesus is actually doing is preaching grace. He's telling the self-righteous, you're no better, because the father throws a big party, and the older son won't go to it. And he's saying, older son, you need to come to the party too.
Yeah.
Because this party is for him. It's also for you. You need to get over yourself. And that's the type of Christianity that people haven't heard, or people aren't hearing.
Yes. And
that's the type of version that is the Christian nation stuff, because all they think of is moralism. They said 10 Commandments in the school. We're going to put 10 Commandments in the school. Have you seen this clip this week? I'm going to send this to you. It's wonderful. Where this guy from Texas gets up and says, they're trying to pass the 10 Commandment law and for schools. And he says, what day is it today?
What is the fourth commandment?
Keep the Sabbath.
Part of keeping the Sabbath holy is not working on the Sabbath.
That is, yeah.
What day is the Jewish Sabbath?
It is on Saturday.
And what day is it today?
It is Saturday. Here we are.
The Christian Sabbath is what day?
Sunday, in honor of the day that Jesus rose from the dead.
And we're scheduled to give this bill a final vote on what day of the week?
It's ironic, isn't it?
Would you be willing to postpone your bill so that we're not breaking the 10 Commandments by working on the Jewish or Christian Sabbath?
I love that you said that, because
you're saying that you'd rather tell people to follow the 10 Commandments than follow it yourself?
I would have rather have had this bill passed the other day when it was time.
We as a legislature are about to force every teacher in the state to post the 10 Commandments in their classrooms.
If they are donated.
Do members of the Texas legislature follow the 10 Commandments?
So again, this bill is about honoring our historical, educational, and judicial heritage with the displaying of the 10 Commandments.
The 9th commandment is thou shalt not bear false witness. Are you aware of any legislators who have lied about anything?
That is, there might be one coming up in a minute if you keep talking. We'll see.
The 7th commandment is thou shalt not commit adultery.
Yes.
Do you think that members of the legislature should focus more on trying to follow the 10 Commandments rather than telling others to follow them?
Maybe they didn't have them posted. It is incumbent on all of us to follow God's law.
I feel like with so much of Christianity, or the Christian nation stuff, I want to say Christianity is Jesus, forgiveness, grace, and I don't think that's a nation thing. I think that's a person thing, and I think that's maybe on its good days a church thing.
Goes back to, was it
the two kingdoms?
The two kingdoms. Yeah,
right.
Where one is grace and mercy and forgiveness and come as you are, and the other, which is the state or the government, which is to uphold the rule of law so its citizens are able to live a healthy, safe, let's say prosperous life.
Right. And hopefully this is where I want to be a little Kuyperian and say I think Christians will hopefully have a state where they can influence and say, rather than have the death penalty for everybody, we're going to think about how we do law better and how we have a state that's not just its worst version or whatever, lest we agree like the Anabaptists. But we need to not label church. We need to quit labeling nation Christian, because that's messing up categories. It's mixing up what we, those are two very distinct things.
Any last thoughts today?
I've talked too much. You wrap this thing up.
Man, my head is going to be spinning like all day. You've left me some really good things to
This is fun.
think about. I might have to go find my Bible.
Okay.
Oh man, I can tell in some of this I've been kind of grappling with, was it the type of Christianity I was taught? Was it the age I was? You know, because it's like I remember the stories because that's what was like drilled in me, or the things like that you have to recite. Like I could name you the 15 judges of Israel, but I couldn't tell you much about them. I could name you the 10 plagues, but couldn't name you much else. So yeah, I've got some thinking to do, but thank you for that. I appreciate it.
No, that's fun. It's talking about stuff I hadn't. So I'm a little rusty, so I hope it came out clear.
Yeah.
And all that.
No, it was good. Well, and just like the history, because, you know, that's not taught in a lot of places, and understand, you know, gosh, that's another thing, like how we got here and what happened before. And if you don't know history, it's bound to repeat itself, and all that is so important. So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome any time. Everybody, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Man, it was a little more religion and not as much politics, but I was here for it. But in today's age, they tend to coincide. So
rightly or wrongly, I mean, yeah.
Both are important. We are Raised Red Living Blue. You can find episodes on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Full video versions are uploaded to YouTube, and connect with us on social media on Instagram and TikTok. You can find Justin Jones on Substack. Title of his stack is Dispatches from Alabama. Y'all be good. Thank you so much, and see y'all next time.
Politics of fear and hate are wrong. We love you and we support you.
But America,
And love are right.
we are not going back.